So let's build that distance class. So I have the basic skeleton or the structure of my program. We're going to be using namespace standard or std. I have my class actually built right here. We're going to have two private instance variables, an int feet and a float inches. And then I put the pseudocode for the public functions that we're going to be using. First of all, we're going to be building a couple of overloaded constructors. Then we're going to try a destructor. And then we're going to do a couple of, I call them utility in the display distances and the getters for feet and inches. And then finally, we're going to start the overloading process. We'll overload the plus sign and the less than sign on lines 26 and 28. And then we're going to overload the cin and the cout, or I should say the stream insertion and the stream extraction operators. So then down below that I have a main, and the only thing that I'm doing in main right now is printing something out just to make sure that my program works. And there it is, my program is working. So let's come back in here and let's start filling things in. So we are going to overload the default constructor. And in order to do that, I'm going to have to comment out the standard constructor. Because if there are user-defined overloaded constructors, then I cannot use the default. So I'm going to overload the default on line 18 with no parameters, and I'm just going to use an initializer list in order to be able to default feet to 0 and inches to a floating point 0. And then on line 20, I'm going to overload that default constructor so that I can receive two parameters. And using an initializer list, I'm going to set my instance variables to those parameters. Then we're going to add a destructor for my comment on line 23. So I'm going to use the tilde, and we're going to have the distance. So I need the parentheses, and then we're going to have the curly braces for it. And oops, it was nice enough to give me the curly braces. So this is my destructor, and we're just going to see how it works. So inside of these curly braces, which would be normally set to something like this, I might see out something like distance object destructed, just so we can see when it would actually be used. And I'll put a semicolon there. But because for the most part C++ will ignore white space, I could actually just put that all together on one single line. And then I'm going to run it to make sure that I haven't done anything wrong yet. All right, so nothing is happening yet. This is probably a good thing. So now we're going to go down there and let's construct a couple of distances. So in main, I'm going to instantiate a couple of distance objects. The first one is going to use my overloaded default constructor, so those values should be 0. And then I am going to use the second overloaded constructor in order to be able to create a couple of more. Let's do T2, and we're going to use the overloaded constructor that allows me to put an integer and a floating point in here. So I'll have D2 at 12 feet, 6.5 inches, and then I will create a third one. Maybe we'll call that distance 3. I'll use that same overloaded constructor that is going to be 1 inch, and then maybe 1 feet and 1.0 inches. And then we probably should display it. So how about if we go back up here and let's fill in this function that will display the distances. All right, so here's my display function beginning line 28. It's void, doesn't return anything, and I am just going to format the output so that it says feet / inches, and so and then we'll do the slash. So let's see. Actually, I want it to say feet, tick mark with a dash, inches, double tick mark with a dash, and in order to get a single tick mark or a double tick mark inside of a text field, I'm going to have to use the escape sequence character. So let's see if my formatting looks good. I'll force an end line at the end of it. And let's come down here and let's just see if we can display any of these distances. And the way that I'm going to access a function of a class is through an object, d1.display. And then we will do d2 D2 dot. We're going to use the dot access operator, and then we'll do D3. And then let's run it and see if we are getting the default values that we set up for all three of them. So the first constructor uses the overloaded default that just initializes everything to 0. The next two use the overloaded constructor that initialized it to a couple of user-defined values. So the next thing that we said we wanted to do is to create a couple of getters for feet and inches. So lines 34 and 35. I'm going to get feet. All I needed to do is to return feet once again, because C++ will, for the most part, ignore white space. I could have played it out on multiple lines, which is probably more familiar, or we can put it on the same line. It's just a matter of preference, which one you prefer. So I'm going to use a getter for feet and a getter for inches, and then we will see if we can get something. All right, so I'm going to go down into main, and I'm just going to see out. Let's just see if we can get D1 feet. I'll see out a header, and then we'll D1 dot get feet. Oops, got to spell that right. Oh, look, it would help me. Get, there we go, get feet. And then I will do a couple of end lines, and then we'll run it and see if my getters are working. So it looks like everything is working so far. If I come back up here to my pseudocode, the next thing that we wanted to do was to overload the plus operator and the less than operator. And we'll do that in the next video.